everyone. The NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project is on West 10th Street in Waverly Place in Greenwich Village to honor the 55th anniversary of the Mattachine Society sip-in, which ended here at Julius Bar. And we're so fortunate to have with us activist Randy Wicker, who was a part of this history-making event. Randy, thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure. Since I've had my 2 shots, I'm going to take off my mask so you can hear me better.
Excellent, thank you.
And I want to tell you that the sip-in, this is part of the history people don't know. It didn't start with Stonewall. It really started back in 1950 in the United States. And before we had, Stonewall was an illegal bar run by the mob. And here you had a legitimate bar. And in 1966, we came in and demanded to be served. Said, we're homosexuals, we demand to be served. We had witnesses, we had a legal ACLU representative. We were setting up a project to be denied service to raise the issue that the State Liquor Authority forbade allowing homosexuals to gather on the premises or to be served alcohol in a bar. And we had gone to 2 or 3 other places like Howard Johnson and a Hawaiian bar, and they said, oh, sure, we'll serve you, no problem, right? They laughed and served us, right? So Julius had been having problems because the police were actually harassing them, setting them up for reasons very murky. I mean, he picked some guy up at one bar, he probably took them here and actually arrested him in Julius's. He hadn't met the guy in Julius, he met the guy at another bar, but the record of being arrested for homosexual prostitution or solicitation was here. That case was kicked out. Then they sent in a plainclothes officer to sit at the bar, and the bartenders were very protected because they were worried about problems like this because they were apparently being harassed. They'd come in and say, oh, you got dirty floors. They had sawdust on the floors that had it on the floor for 40 years. So any excuse to give them a ticket to start building a case against them, because everyone knew in those days you'd go into a gay bar, an illegal gay bar, and the mob would take the cop in the back and pay him off, and they wouldn't even pause the dancing half the time, right? That's the way things operated. And even beyond that, if you were even a legitimate bar, somebody should have to get your liquor from the distributor that was run by the underworld, or else you'd get only rye on weekends. In other words, you had to have your cigarette machine from them. Yeah. And there were people like Reese Crisis over at Sheridan Square, a block from here, said they had a machine that didn't work. Everyone knew it didn't work, but when the mob followers looked in the door, they could see from the front door that, oh, there's a machine back there. We don't have to hassle them. But everyone that went there knew that this cigarette machine didn't work. So they were setting Julius's up, and by raising this issue, we were able to finally make it legal to say that the State Liquor Authority forbidding right of assembly, homosexuals to gather, and the second, the right to drink, to be served alcohol, public accommodations, the same things that blacks had done. And we raised the issue, and that led to the repeal of those regulations. And ironically, not only did Julius didn't want to be a gay bar, because they had in the back, they had rules on weekends that you could, they watched it where there were too many men, they wouldn't let you in unless you had a woman with you. And in the back of the bar, which had a majority of the seats were for couples only, couples and women only. So if 2 women went in where they'd be like just girlfriends hanging out, they would sit in the back. Or a man and a woman, a couple like that would sit in the back. They didn't have anything, the single men were all at the bars. And even there, they got to know their customers and they became aware. Policemen would go in and start talking up somebody. The bartender would come over and say, Joe, and people they knew were regulars, do you know this guy? No, I just met him. They said, you better watch out because we think he could be a cop. And so the guy walked away. This was a big case, one of the cases they set up. And then when he got left at like an hour and a half later, the cop was sitting there and with 3/4 of a beer and started running after him. And so the bouncer, oh, this guy is going to mug him, right? They're following him home to mug him. So he went out and grabbed the guy at the corner here and pulled him back in the door and said, look, Joe, here's a free beer. Just sit at the counter. This guy was following you. Well, the officer then tried to go back in the bar, and they had already told him, you don't talk to strangers in here. And can you imagine? Yeah. Policing males in a bar we tell them that regular customers, you can't talk to strangers in a bar.
Yeah.
And so he went then to 2 officers in a police car, and they went with him, and they went in and they arrested this guy because the guy had, in hushed tones, invited him to his brother's apartment. To what reason? And he said explicitly what he wanted to do sexually with him. And they went in, and it was just set up. That was kicked out too. The guy had been working for the Peace Corps, and he had actually, his brother was a married man, wasn't even gay, because he said to the guy, the guy said, your brother's house, what about your brother if you want to do that with me, He said, oh, my brother's gay too. And so it was just all so murky, the whole situation. And this clarified the issues, and that was right of assembly. And in there you'll see a sign on the wall. There were 3 people that were demanding to be served, and there were 2 of us that also were from Mattachine that were witnesses. And it says 3 deviants demand to be served.
Well, and you had the very savvy idea to have a photographer with you. So
Right. They had the ACLU there, the K. It was all a setup. There's even some people that said that actually Julius was almost working with us because Julius had their license suspended for 15 days. And they were outraged about it because they did everything to keep nothing untoward went in there.
Yeah.
And the officers described people with high-pitched voice and holding their cigarette between 2 fingers and having very limp wrists. And the bartender would jokingly say when someone said, "Get me a hamburger or get me a beer or something," "Okay, baby," using terms like that. And then some of the customers would call each other dearie. I mean, it was just so funny. They painted these bizarre descriptions of people, and the people that actually just bought the bar for all cash, that was murky too. They were new owners. The cops were obviously setting them up to shake them down, because you could get trouble. They came and gave them tickets. You have dirty floors. They had sawdust on the floors for 40 years and never gotten a ticket. And that's the kind of nonsense that went on. And by raising those issues, so people think that the gay movement in the United States started at Stonewall, which was 1 block away. The fact of the matter is, it started in L.A. with Harry Hay in 1950.
Earlier,
And part of it is it went on in L.A., one magazine in Mattachine, and then in New York, Mattachine from 1957 or so, until finally they set it up here. And this is the beginning, really, of true liberation, because this is where the gay movement started, because this is where we demanded our rights to assemble, our rights to be served in the public accommodations. This is the same thing we copied from the minorities, from the African American community, the civil rights community.
And it's wonderful that when you go in Julius's today, there's so much displayed on the walls to teach people about history. When you talk to people about LGBT activism and history, do you often find yourself introducing to them Julius's and the Sip-In for the first time? Like you said, so many people know Stonewall, but
what I found with gay people particularly, but generally speaking, it's become now that everyone thinks that the whole movement started at the Stonewall. The reality was that we had one magazine got the right to send stuff through the mail in 1958. The Supreme Court ruled in their favor, and we had magazines going. It was only though a couple hundred, 200 or 300 activists in the whole country. Very small groups. When I joined Mattachine in 1958, I was the 16th member.
Oh, wow.
You're right.
Do you have your original member card?
Well, I had to lie. I had to say I was 21. I was actually 20. Because I didn't want to have any young people in, And so I think it really is a shame that we don't know the full story of the gay movement, because, movements always begin, you can follow, like when it comes even to the struggle for racial equality. You can even trace it back to Haiti, where for the first time black people rose up and took over their own country. It's wherever you go with any story, there are things that went on in the gay people. The first gay activist no one has ever heard of, his name is Karl, Karl, Ulrichs, Ulrichs. He was a very middle-class intellectual. In 1867, they had like public discussion forums, and he got up and began saying that homosexuality was a normal thing for many people, and it should not be outlawed. And people were saying, can you please speak in Latin? He got outraged that he was even saying these things.
Yeah.
And he actually put out 5 or 7 leaflets. And he was literally considered a scandal because no one had even heard this concept.
Yeah.
How could it be? One person was interested in what he was talking about was Kraft Ebing. If we know the history of sexual studies, Kraft Ebing was one of the first people to be interested in sexuality. But he and Karl Ulrich had one disagreement. Karl Ulrich said it's completely normal. This is just one of the manifestations for people that are homosexual. It's just as normal as it for people who are heterosexual. And it's not voluntary. And it's completely normal. But the other guy, Kraft Ebing, said, well, it's not normal. It's a sickness. And so that was the one place where they disagreed. And actually, poor Karl Ulrich didn't even live to see the opening of the German doctor who started in 1897, started the first gay organization in Germany. And we progressed. That's a story there too people need to know.
Yeah.
In Germany, they got a gay movement going, and we're making headway with the intelligentsia, the intellectuals, who were fighting to have laws changed. And guess what happened?
Yeah.
They made real progress, and then the Nazis came in, and everything they had built, their libraries were burned down. We were rounded up, put in concentration camps. So people have to realize that the currents of change flow both ways. Yeah. They can go forward and they go backwards today in America.
Magnus Hirschfeld.
Yeah, Magnus Hirschfeld.
Trying to remember what it was.
And with people today, here we're going forward, gay marriage and all that. But in Russia and in India, and some of the other places in the world, the Middle East, they'll still chop your head off or throw you off a building, or one of your relatives will stab you because you're a disgrace to the family. Yeah. I mean, so we really have to keep working at fighting homophobia everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and to jump, I guess, is it backwards or forwards in LGBT history? Speaking of people who had disagreements, I mean, I know another one of the sites that the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project has on its website is Cooper Union, because that was the location, right, of a public forum when you had petitioned them to...
No, we went out and leafleted.
Yes,
a guy was talking about how they could cure homosexuals.
And you said they should allow an opposing viewpoint,
right? And we demanded, they agreed to give us 10 minutes rebuttal time. And I got up, I was the one that gave that rebuttal, saying, look, if you're hanging out a shingle and saying you can cure people, the people you're going to attract are people that feel miserable with being homosexual. You're pre-picking a sick, maladjusted group. You're missing all the normal homosexuals, young people like myself, in those days. That was, the mid-60s or something. And I got a greater ovation than the speaker himself had gotten.
Excellent. Well, Randy, thanks for spending a little bit of time with us.
My delight.
Let's go inside and have a toast, shall we?
We sure shall.
All right, I'll follow you.
Okay, thank you.